Good evening. This is Denise O'Mara for ELCR. Welcome to our ELCR Conservation Partners first learning webinar hosted by our good friends, the Trust for Public Land. Tonight's topic is the Trust for Public Land, an introduction for horsemen. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Bayer Animal Health, our sponsor for the Conservation Partners Educational Teleconference Program. Through research and product development, they provide innovative solutions that protect and cure animals. We have two presenters tonight, and the first will be the Associate Director for the Trust for Public Lands Conservation Vision Services, Kelley Hart. As an attorney with a master's in urban planning, Ms. Hart is well-versed in environmental planning and policy. Her work with TPL focuses on Greenway and trail system planning and development, assisting the stakeholders with grant acquisition and federal appropriations and planning management. As the Director of Conservation Strategies and Senior VP for the TPL, our second presenter, Ernest Cook, has greatly expanded the Trust's geographic and program scope since joining the Trust in 1980 and has built TPL's Conservation Finance Program to create new sources of public funds for parks and land conservation, with the program generating over $35 billion in the last decade. Mr. Cook holds a master's in planning and public finance. Welcome, Kelley and Ernest.
Thank you, Denise. This is Kelley Hart with TPL. Thank you, Denise, for that introduction. The purpose is to provide some information about what our organization does and think about where you might be able to plug in with the work that you're doing and if there are synergies between us. So we want to spend about 20 to 25 minutes talking about the services that the Trust for Public Land provides, but we also want to encourage you to jump in with questions. And I know sometimes on the webinar format, everybody's muted and you can't say a word, but that is not going to be the case tonight. You should feel free to jump in. In fact, I will stop, try to remember to stop at a couple of places to ask if you have any questions, but I also encourage you to interrupt me as we're going through this because it is supposed to be a training and we would like for it to be interactive. And I can't see you, so I don't know when you have a quizzical look on your face or an idea or thought to share. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Ernest. This is really just an introduction slide, and it shows where the alignment is between our organizations, which is that we both care about protecting open lands, and that's the loss of open lands is really a major threat for the equine community, and it's something that we care a great deal about as well. And so here are three ways at the outset we wanted to mention that you can get involved and that your interests hopefully could align with ours, and these are some things that you could do. One is to plan, to assist us in planning for land conservation in your area and to make sure that horse-related uses are prioritized. And I will talk more about that in a minute and give a few examples of the types of conservation planning that we do and how equine groups have been involved in that and how their voices have been heard and their ideas incorporated into our planning processes. A second way that you can assist us in our work and in protecting open lands and lands for horsemanship, for horse riders, is to vote for conservation ballot measures that fund farm and ranch land preservation, that fund creation of trails or maintenance of trails. And Ernest will talk more about that. After I've covered planning, he'll go into some details about ballot measures and voting and then lastly, acquiring and preserving land for horse-related uses. We will give some examples of projects that we've worked on around the country to protect lands that are important for a variety of activities, including horseback riding. And so we will be switching back and forth. Like I said, I will start. Ernest will speak for a while, and then back to me, and Ernest will conclude the presentation. So next slide, please. So these three boxes represent three of our major service areas. We could have a couple of actually additional boxes here, but these are the three primary ones that we'll talk about tonight. Conservation vision, which is priority setting, working with communities to figure out what types of lands they want to conserve, and we do that through typically through a stakeholder process. And when it's open-ended, we call it greenprinting, when we're working with communities and letting them set all the priorities and figuring out how to organize and and identify the lands that are most important for the years ahead. These are long-range plans, 10 to 20-year plans for land protection. Conservation finance is another major service area for us, and that is helping governments find funds, and that can be at the local level through cities and counties, and also at the state level, creating new funding programs and through legislation and ballot measures. And then land protection, and this is actually going out and purchasing the land, finding landowners who are willing to sell their lands to us or to our local government or land trust partners, and we help arrange the sales, negotiating options and rights of first refusal to make sure that land gets protected. And this links back to finance, because we're often assisting our partners in finding the funds to be able enable them to be the long-term owners and stewards of the properties. And I'm going to start by talking about vision. I did want to mention a couple of other services that we provide. We do quite a bit of research in-house through our Center of City Park Excellence and our other initiatives. And we also have a park design team. We have some landscape architects and project managers on staff who especially do urban work in actually working with communities to design and build individual parks. But I will jump into talking about vision. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to give 3 examples that I think are representative of the scope and scale of the work that we do on the Conservation Vision team. And as Denise mentioned in her opening remarks, that's where I'm embedded within the organization in the Conservation Vision program, which is basically our planning arm. I'm based in San Francisco, and we also have staff from that team in Boston and Santa Fe, New Mexico. This is a picture of Ray Williams, who is an avid equestrian based in actually North Carolina. He lives in Marvin, and this is a picture that he gave me when we were working together on the Carolina Thread Trail project. And this project, it really launched in 2005 with the Foundation for the Carolinas, the Trust for Public Land, and the Catawba Lands Conservancy. And the idea was that the Charlotte metro area was fast-growing, quickly developing, leapfrog developing, and we were losing the opportunity to be able to interconnect the communities, the rural, the suburban, and the city with one another in a system of trails and greenways, and that we realized that it was an effort well worth undertaking to be able to have an interconnected system of trails and greenways throughout the Charlotte area. And so we started planning to create that trail system. And it's funny because when we started thinking about this in 2005, 2006, we thought it was really ambitious that we would try to plan maybe 300 miles of trails. And we did some initial outreach and came up with a draft map. And I should mention that there is now actually an organization called the Carolina Thread Trail, and they are the leaders of the whole the process and the products, but they hired us early on to do some initial pilot planning. And if we can go to the next slide, it's an image of one of the counties that we worked in. This is Union County, North Carolina. And we did the pilot projects for Gaston County, North Carolina, and York County, South Carolina. And we decided, a strategic team of those 3 initial organizations decided that we wanted to we needed to let the individual communities decide where their trails would go. And so it was ambitious, but we decided to go county by county and do a 10-month planning process with each county and involve not only the counties, but get down to the municipal and the local level and ask citizens where they'd like the trails to go. And so we, at the end of the 10 months, developed a conceptual plan, which here is reflected by the pink line. And the pink line has letters along it. At one point earlier in the process, there were 3 times as many letters. You know, we asked people where they wanted trails to go, and we had a web of ideas. And through a lot of back and forth with folks, and got down to this recommendation. And we ended up working not only in those 2 initial pilot counties, but also Chester and here in Union County. So we led 4 of the planning processes, and every single municipality and each of the 4 counties for which we had conceptual plans universally adopted our plans. And the equestrian community came out in full force in every single one of these counties, and these counties are not the inner, for those of you who know Charlotte, they're not the inner city of Charlotte, though Union County is close. And so there are a lot of people who own and ride horses that live in these counties, and they came to our meetings, people like Ray. Ray was on our steering committee, and talked to us about what would be the best places for horse trails and why. Though it is worth mentioning that at the conceptual level, we haven't yet defined, this will be an unpaved trail or this will be a paved trail. We feel like that's a local decision to be made by the individual municipality or the group that ultimately funds and builds the trail. But since the project has been, since our role has finished, a number of other planning firms have also been involved in working with the other counties, and I think 14 counties have now finished the planning processes, and they have, I told you we thought we were going to get 300 or 500 miles of trail, and the communities have put 1,300 miles on
wow.
on the map. So it's a really ambitious plan at this point, but they've been in implementation, started implementation about 2 years ago, and already there are almost 100 miles of trail open to the public. So there has been major progress, and we're delighted to be involved. The area serves 2.3 million people, and so it's great to be able to help bring trails closer to where people live.
Kelley, where would you say that most of the funding came from to actually to do the planning and then to do the implementation that's happened so far?
The funding's come from a variety of sources. From the Carolina Thread Trail, the Carolina Thread Trail staff has been the primary fundraiser, and they have raised $16.8 million in private capital. They have $7.2 million in land donations and $20.7 million in public funding committed. So it's a big. They spent the first couple of years between 2005 and 2007 fundraising, and there were a couple of great corporate leaders in the Charlotte area, including Ben Wachovia Bank and Bank of America and Duke Energy. Those three were pivotal early leaders in the funding effort, the fundraising effort. But it's ongoing, and it continues to be. They're not to their goal yet, but those funds are used for planning, and they're used for catalytic implementation dollars as well. And a lot of the funds, actually, a lot of the trails are being built by volunteers. That's in these economic times. It's been a very it's been a volunteer-led effort for many of these new trails. Any other questions about the Carolina Thread Trail project before I move on to describing a project in Hawaii? Okay, well, let's go to the next slide then. So I have a few slides about the North Shore Greenprints, and this is for the North Shore of Oahu, and we wanted to I'm going to talk about two Greenprints. The last project that I described is really a trail and greenway planning project, and those are among my very favorites to work on. And another favorite are Greenprints. And so I'm going to give two examples of Greenprints, and this is our newest Greenprint. And then I'm also going to talk really briefly about one of our oldest Greenprints, because we've been doing this work for we've been doing the planning work for about 10 years, so the organization is now 40 years old. So this is on the North Shore of Oahu, as I mentioned. This project took about a year and a half to complete, and our primary partner was the North Shore Community Land Trust, and we formed a steering committee of local leaders. The North Shore covers about 90,000 acres, and I think it's about 30 miles if you drive along the shoreline. And we wanted to, these are the overall goals of the project, we wanted to produce a guidance document that would feature maps that would show, well, what are those places that are most important to us to protect over the next 10 or 20 years. We also knew that it was, there a lot of people on the North Shore, residents and tourists, don't know what voluntary land conservation is. They don't realize that there's a community of land trusts and national conservation organizations that work with private landowners, willing sellers, and negotiate arrangements to transfer land into public ownership or public use. And so we had a big education component as part of this project. We wanted to build community pride for the area, and also talk about food security, because at the time we started this project, and still through to today, about 30% of the North Shore is agricultural land that's for sale right now. Lands that have been owned by traditional, historically large landowners that you've all heard of, like Dole, the pineapple plantations and the sugar mills, C&H Sugar, and those folks who've been getting out of Hawaii and have put their lands up for sale. So it's a pivotal time for the North Shore, and the face of the North Shore, the look and feel of it could really change depending on what happens to those lands that are for sale. So let's go to the next slide, please. So these are the goals that emerged from our public outreach. Actually, the way we did public outreach is we went to meet people where they would be already. Instead of asking them to come to us, we went to farmers markets. And it was actually a really fun way for us to do planning. We got to spend some time on the beach at farmers markets and out in the sun, talking to people about what they want land conservation to do for them. And these are the values that were identified by folks. They wanted to protect ag lands and cultural and historic places. They obviously care a great deal about the coastal region and natural habitats for plants and animals. They're also interested in view planes, views of the ocean and from the ocean, and protecting their water quality and quantity, drinking water, and also just generally the water and health of streams. And they wanted to increase recreation and public access. Particularly, they were interested in completing a bike trail. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here too on the North Shore project, we had some equestrian interests. And on this map here, for example, there are a number of horse farms and polo fields, and they're actually over on the eastern side of the study area. Let's see there. Well, this is not a really good resolution, so you probably can't see it, but there's some areas over on the far left. The study area, the darker gray, is beyond the study area boundaries, but that left sort of almost triangle piece there, there's actually a lot of horse owners, a lot of horse ranches, and places where stables where people are keeping their horses. And so we heard about interest in trails and interest in maintaining, even just the kind of the feel, the character, the rural character of the North Shore. And we asked people what that meant, and they said, well, it means seeing horses, it means seeing horse ranches, it means seeing farms, it means having places where we can ride our horses. And so that was an important value in this green print that came through in the recreation element especially. So this map shows in green the areas that are already protected, and in purple these are the areas where there are those values that I talked about on the last page, where they exist in the greatest number. So there are overlapping values. So land might be important for water quality and animals and recreation or something along those lines. So usually the purple is where there are at least 3 of the 7 or 8 goals are present, and sometimes more. And so you can see that this process shows that there are actually, some priorities are emerging. The next step is to find out, well, what's for sale? What of this is for sale, and maybe find out if landowners, if we could negotiate an arrangement to eventually purchase that land. Are there any questions about this map before we go on? Okay, I have one other green print map that I'll show in just a couple minutes. Let's go to the next.
This is Ernest. So it looks like your study area is exactly the same as the mission area of the North Shore Community Land Trust. Okay. I wondered how is that area defined? Is there a, is it by ridge lines? Is there an ecological, unit?
Yeah, there are. In every time we start a green print, that's a big first question we have to tackle. The first 2 are what do we call it and what's our study area. And so the North Shore Community Land Trust was pretty adamant that we use their mission area, and their mission area is defined by the I believe it's called Apuhana, which is they're based on, you can kind of see some outlines of them. they look like streams, but there's some gray lines that go across the map. Like if you look right in the middle, for example, you'll see 3 or 4 of them that kind of come at a diagonal, and then they go east-west. And those are traditional Native Hawaiian boundary systems. And so the North Shore Community Land Trust was acknowledging and respecting those lines, and then looked, and they actually are based partly on ridge lines and hydrology as well. And so the study area corresponds and sort of captures a number of those. But they also wanted basically Kahuku Point over on the far west, and Kaina Point, which is the far north point. Those are 2 really important landmarks for residents of the North Shore. And so they wanted to capture land between mountain ranges and the Apuhana between those 2 points. So that's the reason for the study area. All right, let's go to the next slide. So at the end of the day, each community where we do Greenprints ends up with a map like the one you just saw and an action plan. And the North Shore's action plan is actually quite a bit longer than this, but these are the main topics that it covers. It covers education and collaboration and capacity building for the land trust, and sets some goals about land conservation. They want to have one new transaction every single year. And so it's funny that they set that goal, because the next Greenprint I'm going to talk about, that's exactly actually what they've been accomplishing, is about 1 project a year. So let's go to the next slide. So I'll talk just a couple of minutes about the Litchfield Hills Greenprint, and this is one of our oldest Greenprints. It's in the northwest corner of Connecticut, and we completed this about 7 or 8 years ago. We wanted to share this example with you because the threats to this study area are typical of the threats to horse country in the eastern United States. It's mostly rural, but there's some suburban development, and there's this real threat of fragmentation. And it was one of the reasons that the community was prompted to do a Greenprint. So the Greenprint Collaborative, it encompasses 23 land trusts, and it's called the Litchfield Hills Greenprint Collaborative. And though they finished their planning process several years ago, they're very much alive and well as in terms of using their Greenprint. And they even have a Greenprint director who's based within the Housatonic Valley Association. He used to be with the Trust for Public Land, and he was involved in the Greenprint planning process, and he went over to HVA to continue managing the Greenprint. So I spoke with him to get an update on what they've been doing so that I could share that with you. And let's go to the next slide so we can see their map. You're going to see that our cartography has really changed dramatically. This is a pretty old map here. I guess it's 2006. I thought it was even older. It's the same, though, structure with green representing the protected land and blue as water. But here we have red and orange to show overlapping conservation priorities. And their conservation priorities here are similar to what we saw in the North Shore, although they have fewer, but they're interested in farmland and recreation and water quality, drinking water quality specifically, and core forests. So when I spoke with Tim, what he said is they've done 8 real estate transactions related to the Greenprint, and they've protected 1,200 acres. And now that was actually, there may be more land since I pulled that number, but Tim said they had a lot of projects in the pipeline, and the Greenprint has been useful to them at various points in the project cycle. They've used it to identify lands, to structure deals, to get transaction assistance, and even to secure public and private funding. It's also helped them to raise money to cover their annual operating costs, and it's been a reason that they've secured Highland Conservation Act funding. And Tim also mentioned that the Regional Litchfield Hills Council of Government has used this as part of their conservation and development plan to recognize what are places we shouldn't be developing, what are places that are important for a variety of uses. Again here, equestrian uses among them. So that's a really quick summary of Litchfield Hills. I know it's late in the evening there, so I don't want to talk too much, and I can't see you, so I don't know if you're still awake. But I was wondering if there are any questions at this point, because we're going to go next to Ernest and talking about conservation funding.
Well, it's interesting that you say that the county or the government used that in their as part of their kind of backup for making some land use decisions as far as their planning is concerned. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that's of real value when it comes to being involved with community land use planning and understanding what's going on in your community, is to be knowledgeable of this type of planning that may have occurred previously or may be done for another reason, that can be incorporated as support for planning decisions, especially when it comes to equine lands and open space and stream corridors and connectivity for habitat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a number of our Greenprints, we always think about them in terms of what we do best, which is negotiating deals in the private sector, with voluntary landowners. But there have been a number of instances where our Greenprints, we've done about 50 of them now, where they've been picked up by regional planning groups mm-hmm. to help inform or advise on zoning changes and more issues in the regulatory environment. All right, well, if there are no other comments or questions, then we'll turn next to Ernest to talk about conservation funding.
Actually, we had a slide here on the conservation easement database, Kelley, but I'd be happy to take that one.
Okay.
There, I'll put you in a better microphone. I think you can hear me better now. In the Greenprint maps that you saw that Kelley was explaining, the starting point for each of those typically is figuring out which lands are already protected. And those typically we put in green as background for the maps. And one of the very interesting and egregious omissions in the data available on protected lands has been that most conservation easements in America are not reflected in the protected areas databases that are typically available to people. So whenever we do a Greenprint, we have to go in and draw down the data that's readily available, and then go and find out any organization or agency that might hold a conservation easement and collect their data sort of painstakingly to put together that entire map of protected lands that is the kind of background or context for our green printing work. So to address this problem, a few years ago, the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities put out a request for proposal for organizations to put together a national conservation easement database that would collect all this information and make it readily available for free to anyone who was doing conservation planning. The Trust for Public Land wound up being the lead partner in that project. We also worked closely with NatureServe, Ducks Unlimited, Defenders of Wildlife, and the Conservation Biology Institute. We split up the research, split up the different states, and assembled our data at the end and launched this database in August of 2011. And we are now raising additional funds to improve and expand upon it. So if you're interested in getting a look at this ever, you can go to www.conservationeasement.us. And it not only tells you what land is protected, but it does tell you who is doing it. So you can find out who all the conservation players are when you go to this database and find out, small land trusts, large national nonprofit groups, as well as public agencies that may be acquiring conservation easements.
Ernest, how difficult is it to glean that information from from what's out there?
Well, with the conservation easement database now, it's very easy to get. You can just download it, but it is a bit of a complex question. In some states and in some parts of some states, other organizations have already done a lot of work aggregating this information, and so they they can share it, and then our job is to maybe update it. But in other cases, you really have to start from scratch and contact each individual land trust. We worked on an inventory of land trusts that we got from Land Trust Alliance, which was also a cooperating partner in this.
Mm-hmm.
And we contact every public agency that we know has been spending money on land conservation in the past several years. So in some places that have a complex fabric of conservation agents, there can be, close to 100 phone calls that you have to make to get that state aggregated and get the data put together. It also is complicated that not all land trusts or public agencies keep their data in geospatial form so that we can put it on the map like this. Some of them only have point data, and some of them have no geographic data at all. So in our Phase 2 work, we are raising money that will enable us to put together a team of digitizers, people who can work with land trusts and government agencies that are willing to share this data, but just they can give us maybe a hard map, and we'll have our digitizers go over it and translate that into a GIS format that we can integrate into the spatial database. So that's a big, big undertaking. We'll be at this for many years. Kelley introduced all three of our conservation services, vision, finance, and land protection, and I'm going to pick up here with the second of our conservation services, which is conservation finance. We define that as finding government funds and making new funding available through legislation and ballot measures to advance parks and land conservation. My focus here is really going to be on the ballot measure work in particular that we do. The Trust for Public Land began to open its doors to work with communities, counties, towns nationwide in the mid-1990s to help create a real wave of adoption of new funding measures that would promote land conservation. And the way the typical way we do this is by starting with what's called a feasibility study, where we look at what are all of the options that a government has to dedicate funds for protecting farms, ranches, open spaces, and trails. And then we trace, we might find at a local government level, typically those options are a bond, a dedicated property tax, and sometimes a dedicated sales tax. And then we will trace through, well, what are all the legal requirements for putting those in place? How much money could each of those raise? What are the likely reaction of people in this community to a proposal to dedicate funds through one route or another? So these feasibility reports combine sort of public finance, economic analysis, and legal research, and to come up with, we hope, at least one option, one good option, maybe two or three good options for a community to pursue. So once we have done that step, we move to a public opinion survey. And these are typically phone surveys done by professional pollsters who are, these are political pollsters. We don't use universities usually or student polls. We hire people who do, who really judge the outcome of, a likely outcome of elections. And because much of our work does wind up on the ballot, so that voters will ultimately need to render their opinion about whether this measure should pass. So we want to make sure that we know what the public thinks about them. These surveys will help us figure out which is the right funding source to use in this community. How much are people willing to have their taxes raised for this purpose? what's the most important purpose for spending the money? Would it be on protecting family farms? Would it be on creating new recreation opportunities, or is it protecting water quality? All of those things are considered in the public opinion survey, and ultimately we integrate the findings from the feasibility report and the public opinion survey into a process of what we call measure design. So the outcome of that is that we will have a recommendation. We will tell this county that we think that you should put a dedicated property tax measure of 1 penny per $100 of assessed value on the ballot at a November general election, and that the purposes of the measure should be following, and that you should set up a citizens advisory group to oversee the spending of this money, and so on and so forth. So that's what we mean by measure design. And if a local, this question? Okay. If a local legislature agrees with our recommendations, they will place the measure on the ballot, and at that point we move into the campaign mode, and that's where we help to raise funds, set up a campaign committee, provide legal advice to the local groups that are the local supporters on how to avoid any infractions of campaign finance laws, and we design the campaign plan for them, help them with fundraising, design campaign materials. And sometimes that can be just simple brochures, but we've got experts who can go all the way to radio and television advertising. And ultimately, on election day, of course, the last step in this is to have a big party when the measure is passed. Now, as I mentioned, the Trust for Public Land launched its conservation finance program in the about 1994, and starting in 1996, significantly as a result of the investment that the Trust for Public Land made, this country witnessed just an explosion of new funding at the ballot box for conservation purposes. So you'll see that up until this kind of pattern of a tall column and then a short column reflects the fact that our recommendations typically are that these ballot measures be placed on a November general election, so at a time when you would be voting for members of Congress. Generally, a higher turnout is more favorable for the proposals that we're advancing because there are more young people who vote, people who are, the low turnout elections tend to have a little bit more conservative turnout, fiscally conservative. So we get a broader, we also think it's a good practice in general to put measures before a broad spectrum of the population. Why should a small minority make a decision on something important like this? So we also like to have campaigns that go to the general public because these campaigns are also very educational. People learn a lot. They learn about where their drinking water comes from, for example. They learn about the importance of protecting wildlife habitat in their communities. So the campaigns are as much about outreach as they are about an education as they are about getting the measure passed. So you'll see here, these are numbers in conservation funds approved we got in 1998. These were not all measures supported by the Trust for Public Land, but the Trust for Public Land has been involved probably in about 80%, about 50% of all measures for conservation funding in this period, and typically we have a significant role in all the big ones. So we've charted that we've lent support to about 95% of the new funding in dollar terms created for conservation in America since the mid-1990s. You do see some drop-off due to the recession here in 2009, 2010, 2011. But remember, this is new approvals. All that money that was approved in 97, 98, 99, and so on, much of that is still flowing. We have designed constitutional amendments that create permanent sources of funding. So even though the pace of new adoptions is decreased, the amount of funding that actually is being invested in conservation of lands in America has not declined at all due to the recession. All right, so on that issue of where's the money being spent, I just want to mention briefly that the Trust for Public Land has created a tool called the Conservation Almanac. This is another big national database. It includes a base map of all land protected by governments prior to 1998, and between 1998 and 2008, we are attempting to gather parcel by parcel information on every parcel of land protected by governments since 1998. We'll eventually go beyond 2008 and bring it current, but right now we're focusing on that 10-year period. So the Almanac includes data on how many acres were acquired, which agency did the acquisition, how many dollars were spent, and what were the funding source, and so on. Let me just go ahead here and show you an example of the Conservation Almanac. This was a particular purchase, or let me see, yeah, it was a fee simple purchase. You can see that on your screen. Purchase type was fee simple. And we can find out that it was the North Carolina Division of Parks and Recreation that did the acquisition, when it happened, how much was spent, and you can get to the detailed report and find out all the different funding sources that might have gone into this. So this is a kind of very, very useful tool for us as we are looking at creating new funding sources for conservation in a state or in a community. Very often you find out, well, what's been done already? That can give you a good tip about what's feasible to do in the future. I want to turn here to Beaufort County, South Carolina, as an example of conservation finance measure that the Trust for Public Land, actually a couple of measures that the Trust for Public Land has worked on. Beaufort County came to us in the late 1990s and asked for our advice on whether it was feasible to put a bond for land conservation before the voters. This had never been done before in Beaufort County. This, by the way, is the low country of South Carolina. So right down adjoining Georgia. So we did our feasibility research, and the county had been considering a $20 million bond, and based upon our study of household impact of a bond measure, we recommended that $40 million would be readily accepted by the voters in Beaufort County. So the county legislature took our recommendation, put a $40 million bond on the ballot at a November general election. That was November of 2000, and it sailed to victory. TPL also came back in 2006 to once again advise Beaufort County on a bond measure, and we are right now working on a third bond measure with Beaufort County. This one will be, I believe, has already been placed on the ballot in November of 2012. So once a year, November general election, and we expect that this measure will also fare very well with the voters. Should also mention that the Trust for Public Land, before we did any of these ballot measures, did do a Greenprint in Beaufort County, and that Greenprint has been used over the years to guide spending by all of these bond measures. I'll move ahead now to Stafford Farm in New Jersey. This is in a community called Voorhees Township, and in this case, there was Voorhees itself passed a small open space trust fund measure, and which the Trust for Public Land helped to design, helped to promote, and helped to run the campaign for. And that money was used to qualify Voorhees Township and this project, Stafford Farm, for a grant from the state of New Jersey. The state of New Jersey was using a constitutional amendment provision that the Trust for Public Land also led the statewide campaign for, that dedicated $98 million a year over a 30-year period to conservation of New Jersey's natural resources. So this is a great example where we help with both the state funding and the local funding to make this project possible. This particular property, Stafford Farm, is a 140-acre conservation site, one of the largest remaining open spaces in this area of Camden County. And before the Trust for Public Land actually negotiated this particular purchase, before we intervened in 2004, this farm, which had been in active farming for over 200 years, was scheduled for a massive development. Now it's protected by a deed restriction which forever preserves the farm, horses, and historic uses of the property. Finally, I've just sort of jumped ahead with Stafford Farm into TPL's land protection services, and so I want to just give you a few more examples of that. It won't take long, and we'll shortly end the formal part of this presentation. The third primary service is land protection, acquiring land from private owners and arranging for its sale or protection through a conservation easement, typically by a role for a government entity. Although now and then we do acquire land that we then pass on to other nonprofit groups for long-term protection. So first of all, I'm talking about land conservation for equestrian purposes. Key consideration is who are the players, who is going to be doing, who can be involved in the acquisition. Obviously, local government level, you've got open space committees, municipal land trusts, conservation commission, planning board, and then the state government level, planning authorities, the State Department of Natural Resources. All of these entities can play some role in helping to develop the resources and the opportunities to get involved in individual land protection deals. So it's very important, if you've got areas that you want to protect, to turn to this array of players in your community and solicit support from any of them. And of course, the Trust for Public Land will endeavor to help if we can. If you look here at the center of this slide, you'll see a couple of horsemen vanishing in the distance along a horse trail in I always get this wrong, Hassanemet Woods. I always twist my tongue. In Grafton, Massachusetts. Hassanemet Woods is a historic site and a window into colonial and Native American history. Again, here, the Trust for Public Land had a dual role. We helped to pass what's called the Community Preservation Act in this town, through which the town adopted a surcharge in the property tax to go into a dedicated fund for open space protection. And their commitment of funds is matched by a state fund that the Trust for Public Land helped create back in 2000. So it's those CPA funds, along with the state match, that provided the funding to protect the Hassanemet Woods. I got it right 2 out of 3 times. That's not too bad. Okay, and here this is one of my favorite land protection projects of the Trust for Public Land. This slide shows 2 Nez Perce women riding their horses at the dedication of Chief Joseph Ranch in Oregon. The Nez Perce tribe was forced out of its ancestral homelands in Oregon into Idaho, and with the protection of the what was renamed ultimately Chief Joseph Ranch, the tribe was able to return to its ancestral homeland. So this was an extremely emotional dedication ceremony for the entire tribe. The tribe will manage this land as a wildlife preserve. And Kelley, do you want to pick up here?
Sure. So this is Windrush Farm in Massachusetts, and it's in North Andover, and it's Windrush Farm is an equine therapeutic riding program, and it's for disabled children and adults. And we worked with local partners and the Windrush Farm Therapeutic Equitation, Inc. To save this farm from development. So we are at risk of losing the land altogether. And this is also an example of where TPL supported and advised a campaign committee, because there was a public funding measure, and it was because of that public funding measure that we were able to protect the Windrush Farm and do the transaction. It was the dollars that came out of that funding measure that we used to help save Windrush Farm. So the next project is we're going to go all the way across to Hawaii. This is Sunset Ranch, and this is actually on the North Shore. It was in the study area for our North Shore Greenprint. I got to actually meet the landowner, Greg Peach, who is the owner and inherited this property. And it's a newer transaction. We just completed it a couple of years ago. And he remains the owner of the land and the manager of this beautiful horse ranch. But he now has a conservation easement over the property, which permits him to continue using it for agricultural and ranch purposes. I've been up to the site. It's gorgeous. It really does look just like that. We'll go to the next slide. We're going to cross the country again to Puerto Rico. This is San Miguel Natural Reserve, or Preserve, excuse me. And these are wild horses, and this is their native shoreline at the San Miguel Natural Reserve near San Juan, Puerto Rico. We have preserved more than 500 acres in this region, and we still have a very active program protecting lands adjacent to this for the reserve and for native species like these wild horses. I think the last slide goes back to you, Ernest, for the Los Angeles River Greenway.
Yes, our final slide highlights the Los Angeles River Greenway in California. Many of you may know the Los Angeles River through much of its course is a big concrete ditch. And many people pass over it every day, not even knowing that it is a river. It's got a little trickle of water in the middle, and it's mostly a lot of cement. But it nevertheless represents a fantastic linear corridor running through a highly densely developed area. So the Trust for Public Land took on the quixotic quest almost 20 years ago of creating a connected greenway along the Los Angeles River. We have been creating a series of parks along the edge of the river. We have been creating trails that link those parks, and in a few cases we, along with our partners, have been successfully advocating for the concrete to be torn up and for some semblance of a natural river bottom and shoreline to be recreated. There are some very visionary ideas of creating major floodplain parks as well along the river that would relieve flooding and when it does rain in Los Angeles, and that would allow more of the concrete downstream of those areas to be torn up. So the Greenway is providing important opportunities for equestrians in the Los Angeles area. So we're very, very pleased that some great progress is being made in this great city. So with that, we are concluding our presentation and would be happy to hear from any of you if there are questions or comments on what you've heard from us and seen from us today.